Only two. Well, welcome. Today I'm going to talk about classification of electrocardiograms using reservoir computing. This is a joint effort with Miguel Soriano and Pro Fisher and Fabio here for GIFIS. First, I'm going to introduce a little bit about the heart, how it works. The first thing is that we have that the heart is just one organ in the circulatory system of the body. It is the most important organ in the system because it's the one that pumps blood along all the vessels, veins, and arteries in all the system. The heart is divided in 4 chambers. There are the upper chambers are known like the atria, is the right and left atria. And then we have 2 more chambers that are the ventricles, right and left ventricle. In the way that it works is that the blood without oxygen that comes already from the different parts of the body comes through the vena cava and arrives into the right atria. The right atria pushes the blood into the right ventricle that sends the blood to the pulmonary system, then get oxygenated through the exchange of gases, and it goes back through the left atrium. Then, and the last part that the heart does is that it receives the blood into the left ventricle, it pushes it, and then it sends the blood to every corner of the body. Then this part, the left ventricle, is one of the most important chambers inside the heart, because it's the one in charge of pumping blood, oxygenated blood to the rest of the system. Well, these mechanic contractions that the heart does is due to circuitry. There are some electrical currents that travel around the heart, and the heart is composed by one muscle that is named the myocardium. And this has 2 different kind of specialized cells. One of them are able to get excited autonomously and automatically without an external input. And there is another one that only contracts and transfers the wavefront or the electricity that is passing through. There are 2 main nodes in the heart. One is in the top of the atrium, of the right atrium. And it's the main one. Let's say it's the pacemaker of the heart. If we have a wavefront that initiates here, then it travels through the right atrium and goes to the left also, and then it makes the contraction of the 2 atria. Then the impulse is arrived at the atrioventricular node, which is the only connection between the atria and the ventricles, electrically, let's say. And then the atrioventricular node delays the impulse, and after that, after 100 milliseconds or something like that, it accelerates the impulse that goes through these pathways here to go to the ventricles, and then it provokes the contraction of the ventricles. The contraction occurs in two times. One is the contraction of the atria, then they relax, and after that the contraction of the ventricle, and after that they relax, and the cycle repeats. Many problems can happen in the electrical part. When we have a normal case, it will happen in the way that I described. However, there are problems when the wavefront just loops into the atria and provoke what is called the fibrillation of the atria. We can have also blocks here in the pathway, in the left or the right pathway, and then this can provoke that the ventricles don't contract completely, or they can also fibrillate. So let's see how we measure or how we detect this. In order to detect the electrical activity of the heart, then we use electrodes that are attached in the chest in some particular places. That is by convention, just for comparison of electrocardiograms that are done around the world. These were registered with an amplifier, and usually, or the typical way, some years ago, was to print this into a paper. Right now, we use it on computers. This is one way to do it. There is another way that is given to the patient, a monitor that is named Holter monitor. The patient can carry this kind of monitor for at least 24 hours, and this is due that pathologies not necessarily appears in every heartbeat. So you can expect to appear at some particular times of the day of the patient. If you consider that the heartbeat beats every 700 milliseconds in rest and normal cases, then carrying a Holter for 24 hours is going to produce about 100,000. So analyzing this data is not easy, because then it cannot be analyzed by any person. It should be someone specialized in this, so a cardiologist. And then the cardiologists have to go through all these heartbeats in order to detect if there are pathologies or not. Just as another example, there is before the other example, let me explain you how is the main landmarks of a normal heartbeat is written here. We have a P wave that is due to the depolarization of the atria. So when they contract, then we get this peak over here. After that, we have what is named the QRS complex. And the QRS complex is due to the depolarization of the ventricle when they contract again. We don't see the repolarization of the atria, but we do see the repolarization of the ventricles in the T wave. These are by far, this is not an exhaustive description of this of a normal heartbeat. These are just very high landmarks of a heartbeat. There are many, many points that a cardiologist is going to see there, and he's going to say, just because of the position of a particular point, I already detect a particular disease. Well, the example I was going to give is that in ambulance, for example, you can have this kind of electrocardiograms. This is a 12 derivation electrocardiogram, so it means 12 electrodes in the chest of the patient. And in this case, there are a dashed vertical line over here that indicates the change from one electrode to another. This, for example, this is the electrode 1, is written here. It finished here, and now is the AVR, that is only this part. So we have 3 lines of 4, so the 12th derivation. However, you can choose one of them is the second electrode here in order to see more of that. This kind of electrodes is measured in an ambulatory system, or in an ambulance, for example, and then it's transmitted to a hospital where a doctor or a cardiologist can see if there is a risk, a cardiac risk, with the patient that is coming into the hospital. As you see, we have 2 streams. We have, for one side, using a Holter monitor, we have 100,000 beats that the physician has to check. And on the other hand, for ambulatory cases or for ambulances, we have very small time of time series, length of time series, that then the physician has to detect from only that information if there is a problem or not. So what we want to do is actually to address the other case where we have so many heartbeats, and then we want to detect if there are pathologies into these heartbeats or not. To do that, we propose to use the concept of reservoir computing in order to classify heartbeats, and then we can suggest cardiologists if there are pathological heartbeats in a particular record or not, and then in this case we can reduce the time for diagnosis.
How long it takes?
Sorry?
I mean, normally when you are going to reduce the time of diagnosis, how long it takes for
the minimum that they use to give you is 1 week.
So they need 1 week to analyze?
At least. At least. This is only if you have a particular cardiologist that is doing this. If that cardiologist is making surgery or taking outpatients or inpatients in a consult, then the time can go to months.
So you mean 40 hours to analyze 1 day of service?
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Something like that. Okay, so let us start into the technical part. We have we are using an arrhythmia database. So we are basically studying the change of rhythm of the normal rhythm when there is a pathology. For example, when the atria make a fibrillation, then this is going to be a change into the rhythm. To do this, we use a database that was developed by the MIT and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and the Beth Israel Hospital in Boston, and it's publicly available at this address. This database contains 48 recordings, but only 47 subjects. And these subjects were taken randomly for a huge database. 23 of them were selected between inpatients and outpatients. And the other 25 were taken carefully in order to include into the database less common pathologies. But these pathologies are still significant in the clinical environment. Each one of the records contains 2 channels, so we only have 2 electrodes in each one of them. And if we check all the database, we are going to find 15 different types of heartbeats. In this table, I have put them into classes, into a normal class and a pathological class. In this case, if you see the normal, well, there is a normal beat that is directly like that. And these are blockage in the conduction, in the pathway conduction through the ventricles. As you can see here, I put it in the normal part because they are. It depends how strong is the blockage. It can be considered pathological or normal. In some cases, or in most of the cases, it's considered normal. However, if any of other pathology appears, then this one is going to pass to the other part, and it will be a pathological case for that particular person. As you see, then it depends on the person that you are studying. If some particular illnesses are considered pathological or not. Well, to make the study, we follow the guidelines that are given by the Association for the Advancement of Medical Instrumentation in the United States. They advise, from now on, I'm going to call it AME, they advise to use only 5 classes, so to take all these into 5 classes that I'm marking here. One of them, it will be the normal class, is going to include this kind of heartbeats. We have the supraventricular ectopic beats, that includes everything that happens over the ventricles. We have the ventricular ectopic beats that are on the ventricles. We have a fusion when we have normal beats and ventricular. And we have an unclassified or unknown class that are all the rest of the beats in the database. We are not the first group studying this kind of problems on medicine. There are many studies already about, and most of them includes a 3-step solution. The first solution would be the heartbeat detection, and usually this is done by this landmark that we have, that is the QRS complex. The second step that researchers use is a feature extraction that can be these intervals between landmarks in the waveform, or if you make a transformation of the signal, then the coefficients of the transformation, or whatever you want to do to the signal in order to make a classification. And the last one will be the classification itself, that is done using several systems like neural networks or cellular automata, etc. In our case, we propose to solve the problem, or at least to get an approximation of the solution using reservoir computing, which is a bio-inspired concept in machine learning. This concept is based in the way that the brain processes information, because it generates patterns of transients of neural activity every time that it receives an input or a stimulus from the outside. The reservoir computing consists of 3 layers. We have an input layer that is going to be the stimulus to whatever, let's say the brain or the reservoir in our case. We have the reservoir that consists of neurons or how we call it, nodes also, and they have in between them several different interactions. Even you can have auto interaction with them. And in the end, we have an output layer that is going to be the response that we have to a particular stimulus. What we ask to the reservoir to do is actually to give us a nonlinear transformation of the input, so we can classify it or we can predict the signal. And one of the first properties we ask is that we expand the dimension of the original input. This is done because of the following. If you see here, I have two classes. One is the red dots and the yellow dots. And I would like to classify them using just one line. So let's say linearly classified. In 2 dimensions, it's not possible. I will need 2. But if I expanded the number of dimensions to 3, then I still can put a plane. And now I can classify these 2 classes. So this is in somehow why we need to expand the dimension of the input, just to make it more easy to classify. The dynamics of the reservoir should have short time memory. This is particularly useful when we are predicting time series, because then we don't only have the information of the present, but we have some past still in mind that we can use in order to make a better estimation. And our results should be reproducible and robust against noise. And also, if we have 2 particular heartbeats, in this case, that they are similar but not equal, then they should be classified as in one particular class. And if I have 2 very different, the dynamics of the system should be different enough in order to be sent to different outputs or to different classes. Given this, we use a particular topology for the reservoir. Still, we have an input layer. Here we will have the reservoir, and I will call right now this the output layer. So we keep the same thing, except that we change the topology of the reservoir. Instead of having that reservoir where the nodes were connected in many different ways, we have a reservoir which the nodes are connected one after the other. And in this case, we only have one nonlinear node, that is the active one, and all the others are what we call virtual nodes, because they don't, let's say, they just observe the dynamics of the system, and they don't perform any transformation. Let's give a closer look at the input layer. In order to use the reservoir computing concept, then we use the electrocardiogram. So in this case, we have 170 samples, and we need to expand each one of these points into a higher dimension, and we use that using a mask. In this case, the mask has 25 points, which correspond to the number of neurons inside the system. The mask is a binary mask that only can have -1 and 1. This is not particularly strict, but we did it in that way. If we make the matrix multiplication between these 2, then you get as the input matrix that is here is in a color scale. We have the length of the mask over here and the length of the signal in the other direction. And this is what we are going to feed into the nonlinearity that corresponds to the reservoir in here. This nonlinearity here is given by the Mackie-Glass oscillator, which has 3 parameters. The first one is eta over here. That is the feedback strength, so how important will be the input that is going to enter in the feedback of the nonlinearity that is going to enter again in the nonlinearity. We have gamma over here, that is the input scaling. So this is going to scale how important is going to be the input, so this matrix, inside the nonlinearity. And we have an exponent p that allow us to tune the degree of the nonlinearity. That this can help for different in different tasks. We can have different values for it. When we feed this matrix into the nonlinearity, for every line, we fill all the nodes in the delay line, and then after that we can read out the information that is in each one of them.
Which parameter regime of the Mackie class are you using? I mean, chaotic, hyperchaotic?
Yeah, we're using just for the beginning of the reservoir, we're using while it's in a stable form. So we read out the information that is into the virtual nodes, and then we construct what is called the state matrix that I'm going to show here. The state matrix has the same dimensions of the input matrix. Is the number of nodes and the signal length. But right now it has the information of the dynamics when we perturb that steady state of the Mackie glass with the input that we're including. For every heartbeat in the database, we're going to have one state matrix. And then all these state matrices, we are going to pass it through a learning process. Because what we want to construct a classifier that can make a classification of heartbeats. And that classifier needs to learn how to make it. In order to do that, we use what is called logistic regression. Just a quotation here, usually reservoir computing use linear regression in order to find the weights or to make the classification. However, we consider that it's more suitable for this kind of task where we have a binary answer that the logistic regression is going to be better. We have binary answer here because we are asking, is this heartbeat pathological or not? If it's pathological, is this of this particular pathology or of the other or the other? So all of them are binary answers. So the logistic regression is based in what is called the logic transformation, which is the natural logarithm of the odds, where the odds are defined like the ratio between the probability of an event to occur and the probability of the same event not to occur. We want to relate this logic transformation with our data in a linear way. So then we have to find what are the values of A and B that satisfy this kind of equation. Using our state matrix, like our data. For human purposes, this is not easy to interpret. What is the logic function of something? So what we do, we use something that is easier. That is, we can take out of this the probability, and now for us it is going to be easy. We are going to get the probability of a particular heartbeat to be pathological or to be normal. So now we can say, for example, a particular heartbeat has a blockage in some place with a 90% probability. Let's go back to the data set. Our database has about 100,000 heartbeats when we combine all of them. And we divided this database into two small data sets, where I'm going to call the training set and the testing set. Something that we do, they are exclusive, so we cannot have a patient that belongs to both. Every one of them either is in the training or is in the testing. It cannot be in both. The design of the training and the testing set is made in order to have an equilibrium into the number of heartbeats that are in one set and in the other. And also, for those pathologies that are complex, that were carefully selected by the cardiologists when they made the database, we also equilibrate them into the two data sets. Our first result is in this case what we call the model complexity. In here we have the number of nodes or neurons that are into the reservoir, and we have the error rate, that is the number of times that I made a mistake in the prediction over the total number of samples. We have a training error, that is the dashed line, and the training error, let me tell you how it's computed. We take the training data set, we create a classifier using that data set, and after that we're going to evaluate how the classifier performs. And in order to evaluate, we forget about the testing and we use again the same data set. So I am learning how to classify a bottle, and I use this bottle. And when someone asks me, it's going to use the same bottle to ask me. And now I'm going to see how well I learned that. So if I do that, then I just follow this line. In the beginning, when the number of nodes is very small, well, the error is about 15%. When I start to increase the number of nodes, the error starts to go down. This I'm going to explain a little bit better after I explain the other error. We have the same or something similar to the testing. For the testing, I'm going to use the training data set to create the classifier. And after that, I'm going to take the testing data set to evaluate. So I'm learning with this bottle, I'm going to be evaluated with another one. So I've never seen the other one in that case. If I do it in that way, then I get this kind of performance. What we can get from this score is the following. In the beginning, we have what is named a high bias problem. And this high bias problem is due that the system is so small or is so simple that it cannot actually make any classification. It doesn't even understand the first bottle that I give. So after that, when I ask even with the first bottle, it cannot differentiate. On the other hand, on the other extreme, we have what is called a high variance problem. In this case, what is happening is that the system gets used to the training data set. So it learns the training data set so well that it's not able to make any generalization. So if you see the data, the training, then the error is small. But if I show something different, then the error goes up. In the middle, there is a trade-off between the two, between these two programs. That is when we find the minimum of the testing error. We find it at 25 nodes. This is what we consider the optimal in order to use the system. And from now on, I'm going to use 25 nodes into the reservoir. However, there is something else that is telling me this curve. That is the distance or the difference between the testing error and the training error. In the ideal case, these two curves should go together, down, and after that the testing should go up again. In this case, it's telling us that we don't have enough samples or enough heartbeats in order to get this ideal case. I want to clear something about this, because maybe you are wondering, you say you have 100,000 heartbeats. Well, the problem is not the number of heartbeats. The problem is actually the number of patients. We only have 47 patients. And the thing is that each heart performs differently, according to how healthy it is, according to sports that they do, etc. So what we need is more of these hearts or more of these systems performing heartbeats. So it's not, for us, it's not interested to get more heartbeats, but to get more patients or more subjects.
So how good is 0.1?
How good is?
Yeah, the error of 0.1 is 10%. What exactly is it?
Yeah,
Is good,
after I'm going to make a comparison with other studies, and then you will see if this is, if you can have by yourself if this is good or not. So in the multi-class oscillator, as I mentioned before, we have different parameters. For this particular task, we set the degree of the nonlinearity to 7. We have seen that this performed well in classification tasks, something related also with the memory. But here, what I'm doing, I'm changing the values of eta and gamma, which are my free parameters. And as you can see, for different values, I have different state matrices. So some of them are too clear, some of them are too plain, let's say. Others are too rich in dynamics or oversaturated. So in order to check where is the place that we can perform better, then we go over all the numbers. For eta and gamma, remember that this is the feedback strength and this is the input scaling. And then we look for the optimal square.
Just it was just listed. You didn't have realized you didn't have 3 parameters, you have 4. Also tau.
Also tau. But tau in our case is determined directly by the number of nodes, of virtual nodes. And since in the previous slide we already set the number of nodes to a particular number, then tau is determined. So in here we have seen. Sorry, there is some minimum over here that is not very well seen in this slide. The minimum is over here. We have checked in different places, but we get the minimum error over there. This means actually what we saw is that the richest or the most diverse dynamics is in this kind of matrices, because it's not given to the QRS. In the QRS, we can detect some pathologies. However, most of the pathologies are given before or after. And then this kind of matrices is given more important to the size of the waveform than to the QRS system. Now let me introduce what is the confusion matrix. I hope you don't get very confused on this. Sometimes I do. The confusion matrix is the following. We have 2 classes, let's say normal and pathological. In the columns, we have the real cases. So if I have a heartbeat that I already know is pathological, this is going to consider real. In the rows, we have the prediction of the system. So I give to the system a pathological heartbeat. I ask, what do you think is this? And the system says, it's pathological. If the answer of the system is pathological, then I'm in a true positive. If the answer of the system says, no, it's normal, then I found a false negative. And so on for the other. With this kind of matrix, then we can define different measurements to see how well performs the system. I know there are many definitions here, and at any time of the presentation we can come back. I will try to discuss only one that is the most important. However, we can discuss the others if we need to. The recall, or what is called the recall here, is the proportion of real cases that are correctly predicted. So what does it mean? It means that if I have a pathological case, and then I found it that is pathological, the recall is going to be high. High here, it means 1. On the opposite case, if I have a pathological case and I found it, or I predict that it's normal, then the recall is going to get down. Why is this important? In the case of a medical application, it is very important because then we can, if we have a high recall, we are detecting the pathological cases. I am sure that maybe you think, but if I am healthy and you tell me that I am sick, it's not good neither. That is detected by the precision. But yes, it is true, but it's worse if you are pathological and I tell you you are healthy. So in the medical case, in the medical environment, the recall is going to be more important. As you see, recall and precision are defined for the positive cases. However, we can have, with the inverse statistic, we have a specificity that is the same than recall, but now using the negative case, that are the red one, the downer row. We have other 2 definitions that are the false rate positive, positive rate, sorry, that is just the opposite of the specificity. And one that is important here is the accuracy. There is actually a trade-off, or an average, a weighted average, between recall and specificity. Here we have all the number of samples. Now, one of the difficult parts, that is comparing results. We found our results, and now we have to see how is this comparable with other studies. So for that, we found that it's very difficult because not all the studies use the recommendations that we're following. And so instead of having 5 classes, they have all the 15 classes that I mentioned in the beginning when I mentioned the database. And the other thing is that they don't publish all the measurements that I show now. And this is something that doesn't allow us to see the advantage and disadvantages of their models or their approach. Because one, if you base everything on recall, it doesn't mean that you are performing well in all the others. So you actually need to show most of these measurements. Before giving the results that we found, let me remember the multi-step solution that is given by other authors. They have the heartbeat detection, the feature extraction, and the classification itself. In our case, we're going to need the heartbeat detection. For this database in particular, the database is marked where every heartbeat is, so we just read it from the database. And what I want to say here is that we don't use any kind of pre-processing of the signal. We take the heartbeat as it is from the machine or directly from the computer. We don't make any kind of filtering, any kind of reduction of downsampling, whatever. And the classification, in our case, is going to be done by reservoir computing. This is our first table of results over here. If you want to, for us, all the measurements are here. If you find a dash, it means that author didn't publish it for that particular measurement. In this case, what we did to show these results is the following. We forgot about dividing the 2 training sets. The training and testing set, we gathered it, put it all together, mix it randomly, and then use 15 classes and make classification over that. If we do that, then these are our results here. The thing we can say over here is that they are comparable with all the results that are published by other stats. However, this doesn't, there is a kind of trap there because for training and testing, you are using heartbeats from the same patient because they are mixed randomly. And then there is a kind of dynamics that you saw during the training step that you are using for the testing. So this is not the ideal case. We just need it for comparison purposes. The AME recommendations says, okay, divide the database in only 5 classes, create a training and testing set that they are different, and now I don't care for the 5 classes, I just care for 2. I care for the ventricular ectopic beats, and I only care if you can classify them from those that are not. So I don't care if the other is normal or is fusion or whatever, just ventricular from those that are not ventricular. And the same case for the supraventricular and not supraventricular. We have the results here for other 2 studies. And we see, for example, let's focus on recall. For the ventricular case, our results are comparable. Actually, in this case, it's the lowest for the ventricular ectopic beat. However, for the supraventricular ectopic beat, in our case, is the highest. So still, we cannot say we are the best approach, but we can say that we are a good approach because we are in comparable numbers. If you see the other cases, then we can have, for example, in the accuracy is the highest. The last thing is the following. In a clinical environment, if you go to a hospital, for example, it would be more important to see what kind of pathology you have. Not only you have a ventricular ectopic or supraventricular ectopic, but which one you have, because this is the one we're going to treat particularly. If you do that, well, with other authors, we make the 5 classes, and then we try to classify these 5 classes separately. When we do that, then this I believe is the most important for the application directly in a clinical environment. For this, we have then very good results, I will say. in some cases are comparable. For example, here there is 80%, let's say, comparable and better than the others. Like in this one over here, it actually shows that there is an improvement over the measurements that other authors have shown. Let me start with the conclusions. At the moment I wrote this presentation, we were the first one, or we are introducing the concept of reservoir computing for the solution of medical problems. In our case, our approach doesn't consider or doesn't need any pre-processing on the waveform of the electrocardiogram, but it's based on the weight or on the morphology of the heartbeat. We follow the international recognized guidelines for the definition of classes and measurement of performance, and we did it well in that measurement. Our multi-class classification, that is the last one I show improvement over other reported results, and we expect that the high speed of the reservoir that can be also implemented in hardware, and the fact that we don't have pre-processing of the signal can lead to a real-time solution, so that you can have you can be registering the electrocardiogram, and at the same time the computer already marking which heartbeat has problems or not. We're continue working on this thing. However, we need a bigger, but I would say actually a richer database, because of what I said before, it's not necessarily more heartbeats, but more patients. And we believe that this can lead to better performance. And I mentioned that the database has 2 channels. So we think that we can use the second channel in order to improve our performance. And to do this, I'm going to show just a short thing of the things we're doing now in this direction. And let me introduce you this. We are using the Lorentz system. That's described here. It has this kind of attractor. And what we are doing here, we are trying to predict one chaotic time series of one of these variables. Actually, we're trying to predict x using different variables. Let me say this better. What we do is the following. We put into the reservoir one part of the x time series, and we train with that one. And after that, we make evaluation, and our evaluation is actually to predict a similar time series. Not exactly the same, but a time series that continues after that. When we use x, when we train our predictor with x, and we try to predict x, we found this plot over here and here in blue, and I am not lying, in blue is the real time series that we have, while in red is the prediction of the system. As you can see, they are very good. What I did in the downer part, I computed the difference in every time step, so you can see that they are very close one to each other. However, if you see here, we are in the order of 10 to the minus 1. If you do now, you use not only x to train, but you use x and y, and you are using more information of the system in order to predict the values of x. And then, if you do that, now the errors, or let's say the difference between these 2 time series here is smaller. For doing this, there is an estimator that considers for 2 time series, the real one and the predicted one. It considers the deviations on the system, and then we can have a number directly, not this kind of dispersion here. If we do that, this estimator is named normalized mean square error. And I have here different sets that I have tried. For example, all of them are trying to predict x, the chaotic time series of x. And when I'm using y in order to predict x, then my error is the highest for this case. I can use x to predict itself, and it still is these variables, I am adding more information. And X and Z are related in this way, while X and Y is the best performance that we get. So, seeing these results, then we base our future work for the electrocardiogram that we can use the second channel in order to introduce more information into the system and then to improve the performance in our system. The results of the part of electrocardiograms are being submitted to the Journal of Biomedical and Health Informatics. And please, proceed to questions.
Questions?
You said that the reservoir computing is faster than normal computing. Is it because you're using lasers or because of the method?
Did I say that?
It's written.
I said that reservoir computing is fast. If you implement it in a hardware case, then it's going to be for the laser. If you implement it, sorry? Or electronics. If you do it in software, well, it depends how good programmer you are, then you can have better performance or not. The thing is that in any case it's simpler, because one of the advantages of reservoir computing is that you don't have to compute so many weights. I mean, it's not the weights, it's the connections between nodes. Like it is. I lost. You don't need to compute the connections of between nodes or between neurons, but you only compute the connections that goes out from the reservoir to the output. And then this makes it simpler, make it faster than, for example, normal artificial neural networks. So it's going to be faster in that way.
Another one? Maybe it's not here today.
Yeah.
I mean, you make this Lorentz attack transform thing to show that if you have two variables, it's going to be more predictable. So there's the same relation between X, Y, Z that is going to be between electrodes.
Is the same relation?
I mean, the relation between feeding two variables for the Lorentz case, how is this related to feeding two electrodes?
Well, this we don't know exactly. That's why we just base our argument into that. We want to see if actually when we add the second electrode, we are adding more information. Because in the Lorentz case, you have that they are independent variables, they are coupled. In the heart, you are measuring the system from two different points of view. Because one electrode means you are measuring something like in this direction, and the other means that you are measuring in this direction. So you can be seeing different parts of the same dynamics, which is something similar in the Lorentz case. We are based on that. We haven't still arrived to the point to see if it is really better or not. But we are based on this that it can happen. It can help.
Yeah.
Thomas?
What possibilities are there to optimize the reservoir?
Many. For the reservoir, there are many parts. If you see only the reservoir by itself, and when I say the reservoir by itself, I only mean this. You can try to find a nonlinearity that is particularly suited for the task. However, what we have seen using different nonlinearities is that it doesn't matter which. It's not that it doesn't matter, but there are many nonlinearities that can perform as well as this one.
In the delay loop setup.
In the delay loop.
Okay.
Yes. So, but maybe if you look for many of them, you can find some nonlinearity that is particularly suited for this task. But this will change from task to task. It doesn't mean that nonlinearity is going to perform well in the Lorentz case.
And in magic, I mean, how you know which one is which, right? I mean, for example, here you have a pulse. So what you should try? You should try Lorentz. You should try different counting attractors. you have any guide to select or to try the non-linearities, or is just blind case?
Since the task, since it depends on the task, I believe it's going to be a little bit blind. You can always see the bifurcation diagram of the nonlinearity you have, some properties, chaotic properties that it has, how is the steady state of the nonlinearity. But in general, it's a kind of blind. You have to check for different. Please.
If I may add something there, you can test the property that, for example, the nonlinearity will have an effect on the memory that you have, and you know the memory requirements that are needed.
Okay.
So you can, for example, test that. At the same time, the property of the nonlinearity you can test it by feeding different signals into the reservoir, and then determine the generalization property, meaning the rank of the state matrix. So how many different dimensions do you actually create?
Okay, so this is like saying what is the power and the capacity of each. For example, here you have a pulse. That helps you in order to decide which is a nonlinearity. For example, I'm guessing if you were using the same dynamical system as the one generating the heartbeat, that would help. For example,
you would know that if you have a stronger nonlinearity, that due to the nonlinear folding, your memory would decay.
okay.
So you would have already a guess what will happen. But the details certainly require the particular evaluation. So,
Yeah, no, thank you.
Any
Any
other
other question?
Can you go to the slide where you show these testing training curve?
Sure.
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, it seems that the more nodes you have, the machine gets too used to the cases. You give to the machine, and then it cannot
Yes,
predict.
it overfeed the data.
Yeah, to have the data overfeed. So, at some point, you mentioned that you're lacking patience. You're lacking data.
Yeah.
In order to improve the prediction, you need more data. But you mentioned that you need more patience, not more heartbeats.
Yes.
But at some point, the more patience you get, you're gonna have more heartbeats, right?
Imagine the following. Imagine I have only one patient that I record during all his life the heartbeats.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have a huge database of this particular patient. So what is the thing that I try to get here? I try to get a generalization. So that those heartbeats I want to work also when I predict your time series, your heartbeats. But since I am so specialized in this particular software, I'm not going to generalize. And then the predictions that I can make here are not going to work for you. So what I need is I need the variability around many systems or many hearts that are producing heartbeats, and then I can broaden more the range of prediction I can make.
So you predict that if you have the same number of heartbeats that in this case, but among more patients.
These are not heartbeats, these are nodes.
Okay, so this is a limitation of the topology.
This is how big is the system. How many nodes or neurons are inside the system. It's not the number of heartbeats.
Okay.
Any other question?
Any other?
Do you expect that there is saturation for the training with the number of patients? So if you have, let's say, more than so and so many patients, then
Yeah. There is another curve that I'm not showing here that is actually, we have the error rate, and here we have the number of heartbeats, of the number of samples. It does happen. There is a point where the error just gets steady. It doesn't matter if you continue increasing the data set.
Okay, with the same patient.
Yes. Let's say for the patients we have here, it happens to us that there is a point that it gets steady. So adding more heartbeats of those patients doesn't help. This happens. And it's happening in our case. That's why we get to this conclusion. That is not only that we need more samples, we not need more heartbeats. We need more patients.
yeah, but if you would have had them, would you have a perfect detection at some point?
I only can get perfect if I have all of them. There's something, it's not possible.
What about other applications like weather forecast? You have time series for different places, so you have many places, and you can train that there. And in principle, as it seems to work so well for the Lorentz system, I wonder what would happen in that case.
Yeah, we have
Or
tried.
for the brain, I don't know if this is how good it is, right? And then the question about free will is there. So
Yeah, there are many things. If you base your hypothesis on what I showed from Lorentz, then you can say, okay, so you can go to the other one and make a almost perfect prediction. But in there are other things that are, let's say, bothering the system and getting into disequilibrium. We have tried predicting when El Niño phenomenon is going to happen. We tried this using some model data, and using the model data, it works good. But then when you go to real data, there is something that is not working very well, and you can make predictions, but sometimes it's not so accurate. So maybe what we need to do there, we have to either to see what kind of features we need to extract from this real data in order to make the data better, let's say, or better suited for the result. Or maybe we cannot make it. But I hope we can.
the question is why, right? Because in principle. What makes?
I think it's because there are much more variables that we are considering into the system. For this, we are considering all of them. So we have 3 variables. Well, this considered 2, it gets better, but we are considering almost all of them. In the other case, we don't know how many variables are there, and we are probably considering 1, that is the change of temperature in the air. So probably this variable is not the one we need in order to make the prediction. This is one guess I can make why we cannot go directly from one to another.
Yeah, actually, for instance, in time series prediction of laser dynamics, we do very well. It's 5% error. But then you have at most 2 variables or 3. But again, for the weather forecast, you may have so many parameters entering and sampling times that you cannot control.
But the models that they use for predicting
with the model it works very well. Actually, for the linear model it works perfectly. But then as soon as you go to the data, but the model and the data did not coincide either. That's
exactly. In the model you also have few parameters.
But that tells you something as well. It tells you that the variables that you observe are not sufficient. So you learn also from that.
Yeah.
May I add something related to this class?
Sure.
You mentioned that your method doesn't need pre-processing of the data, right?
For the case of
For the hardware, yes. As far as I understood, that's because of the database you already are using, right? With this pulse
not really.
market, right? You mentioned during the talk, right? This market. So my question is, how do you expect that the pre-processing of the data affect or impact your method results?
Yeah, well, the fact that we don't use pre-processing doesn't depend on this database. The first step was the heartbeat detection. This is the part that we don't do because in the database, the feature extraction doesn't depend on the database. So the second part was how I expect that it's going to change my results if I use feature extraction. Right? This is your question. Well, most of other studies have used feature extraction in order to improve their performance. There are some features we are not using here that are very important and that we at some point we will have to include. That is, and to expect the next one at 1 second later, but after that it doesn't happen, it happens 2 seconds later. So the distance between one heartbeat and the other is a feature that is important, and that we should, at some point, we should extract and include it. And this should improve our prediction also. So we have many things that we can improve in this research. There is this of picture extraction, but not the kind of picture extraction where we measure intervals, which is the one that takes a long time and actually makes that the classification has to be offline. You cannot measure the heartbeat and immediately say what's going on, because this has to be checked. You have to check the landmarks. Where is the peak of the T wave? Where is the Q point, and so on. And you need someone specialized in that. So if we want to do it automatically, this kind of the distance between two heartbeats is easy to compute. It's not time consuming, and then is some kind of preprocessing we can add.
Thanks again.